Welcome to PowerPods, our Living Legends series. This collection of podcast episodes is dedicated to company and industry legends. History relived through their stories.
Welcome back to our Living Legends series here at PowerPods. Today here with me we have Steve Brewer, Senior Product Manager for Arresters, and he has been with Hubbell Power Systems for 40 years. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So Steve, let's jump right into it. Can you tell us a quick overview of your history with Hubbell?
Well, I joined Hubble in 1981 as a product design engineer dealing with distribution arresters. From there, I moved on to be a short-term tenure as a polymer chemist for Hubbell Power Systems. Then I became an application engineer for surge arresters and high-voltage insulators. After that, I moved into the arrestor marketing side exclusively as an application engineer, then as an associate product manager, and then finished out the last 8 to 10 years of my career as a senior product manager for surge arresters.
That's awesome. So what do you think is your greatest achievement in your time at Hubbell?
Without a doubt, the launch of the polymer house distribution arrestor was game-changing for the utility industry. Prior to the introduction of that product, all arresters were in porcelain housings, and those porcelain housings would be prone to leaking, getting moisture in them, and the material was brittle. So if an arrestor was to fail in the service, have its performance characteristics exceeded, it would, in all likelihood, catastrophically come apart and possibly injure linemen or other equipment in the area, people's cars and so on. The polymer arrestor alleviated those two problems, certainly reduced them to a large extent. The moisture ingress issue was reduced greatly. The fact that the polymeric housing was forgiving meant that it wasn't going to be throwing hard parts around, and it improved safety overnight. And within 5 to 6 years, Hubbell had completely gone out of the porcelain arrestor business for distribution, and the utility industry, being very conservative, doesn't change that quickly. But in this case, demand was very high, and it was something that the industry really wanted. So I was able to work on that as a product design engineer, and from the polymer side in the early development. And then I got the opportunity to bring that product to market, as an application engineer. The year that we launched that product, I spent approximately 50% of the time on the road promoting that product to customers. So I really got to see it all the way from infancy to product launch. And it was a great thing for the company and the industry.
So I'm just curious, in what ways were you able to help shape the utility industry over the last 30 years?
Well, there were two main things, one of which I've mentioned, but we'll revisit that in a second. When I came to the company, the technology of surge protection, the active components were a silicon carbide element coupled with a gap. And we could go into all those details, but that would bore the people. But the protection that those products offered was adequate, but wasn't tremendous. When I came, we were just beginning to make this transition into metal oxide varistors. So again, I was able to help educate customers, educate inside the business, about the advantages of metal oxide arresters. And with metal oxide arresters, you get a much greater level of improvement in protection, which allowed utilities in some cases to actually reduce the installation level on their equipment, which saved them money and took advantage of that better protection. So that was certainly one, was working to help promote the transition. And of course, the second one was the polymer arresters. And with the polymer arresters, again, much safer, It used the MOV metal oxide varistor technology, but it was safer. It was introduced first in the distribution market, and then I was able to help extend that into both substation and also into transmission line arresters, which are used to improve power quality by reducing lightning trips to large industrial factories off of a transmission line.
So in your role as a product manager, what efforts did you make to train and grow your team?
Well, a lot of my background originally was in education, and I felt that the application engineers were extremely bright, but came from a lot of different variety of backgrounds. So a lot of training, both myself or bringing in other speakers to train them on the concepts of the power system fundamentals and so on. Also organizing to make sure that they were able to get to industry trade shows, the IEEE T&D show, the NRECA show, and so on, getting them on the floor to be able to interact with customers and learn, and then be able to walk those floors of those shows to be able to see what other products were out there. Hosting customer visits are a big part of that role, and also a great learning experience because you get to interact with the factory and you get to interact with the customers and learn how to be able to work in that environment. But those are a lot, just primarily focused on education and using that background that I had.
So we have seen that the industry has changed. How were you able to adapt to these changes?
Well, there were lots of changes, and from the make of the product, the porcelain changing to polymer and so on. From a technology standpoint, just in doing my job of helping educate customers and train customers and so on. In my tenure, I had the opportunity to visit almost 30 countries for Hubble, but the changes, we would switch from using 35 millimeter slides to overhead transparencies to laptop computers, and interacting with customers, desk phones to cell phones, faxes to emails and so on. And you just need to be able to adapt, always be learning and trying to stay current on technology. So, in addition to the industry changes, which were primarily product driven, and convincing customers of the viability of polymer, the changes of technology is how we do our job was the other challenge, and we've weathered that well. I think that what helped is having children, and they use all the devices, and they help us learn to use the devices.
Yeah, so you mentioned you have a background in education. How were you able to put this to use in making an impact on customers and coworkers?
Again, as I'd mentioned earlier, training, education of the application engineers, but also the ability to go out and do training seminars. We would do an in-house arrestor seminar once a year, but we would also do, traveling road shows. And that was, I guess that was the big thing. I was always very happy, when we would have sales meetings because, first of all, it got me out of the office, and that was always nice. But secondly, they would usually have, sales, awards that the sales force had voted to, the marketing team that supports them. And I was lucky enough and used my education enough to get a lot of recognition over the years by the sales force for the training efforts and being able to help with them and communicate the concept of a surge arrestor so most people can understand. Surge arresters are a difficult product to convey because they really have no moving parts. And when an arrestor operates properly, nothing happens to the environment. The lights stay on because the lightning arrestor diverts the surge. And, so it's different than hardware and so on, where you can actually see the effect of it. So the education background allowed me to take that concept and put it into terms that people would more easily understand.
So as you look back over almost 4 decades of service to Hubble and the utility industry, what other highlights make you proud?
Oh, there have been a number. When I first started with the company, I had never flown on an airplane. Made one short trip for the company, but my second trip involved a potential order, and of course I was just a design engineer at the time, no sales and marketing involvement, and we had a potential order in South Africa. So I took a few of the metal oxide varistors that we had just started to produce, got on a plane, flew to Johannesburg, met with the engineer, because that's who we wanted to meet with, was the design engineer, and was successful in convincing them that we had the capability to make that product. And we ended up getting the order. And it was our first large order for that new product. So I had worked on the design. Then I also got to work on the sales of it. I've been involved in standards work for surge arresters almost since my time started. In 2011 or 2001, I received from IEEE a standards medallion for work on standards. So that's something I'm particularly proud of. I've still been able to remain involved with NEMA. I represent Hubbell as the section chairman of the NEMA surge arrestor section, NEMA section 8LA. And that gives me a lot more insight into what's happening in the marketplace, what our competitors are doing, and I'm able to feed that information back to the organization here and also make a difference in, voicing the Hubbell position. So just a lot of stuff. Being able to make the transition from education to here was the big one. But getting that first order, it was great. Sitting on that plane, and I knew that I had nailed it, and that was great.
That's awesome. So what advice would you give to those just starting their careers?
Oh, there's a lot of things that could be done. I think communication is the real key, and we tend a lot to deal with electronic communication. I know that my son and his girlfriend, we have a group text set up, and so we get to communicate with her. But text messages and electronic communication can't convey emotion very well. And I think a lot of it is just direct communication. Be willing to pick up the phone, talk to people. If you're in the same building, go see them. You can learn so much by looking at their facial expressions and so on. Be patient. A lot of times people, when we would have customers in, application engineers would want to launch right into their presentation. And it's really just wait a few minutes, talk to them, find out what they're interested in, and it will help you flow that conversation better. Learn as much as you can. And probably, and I would definitely benefit from this myself. Listen more than you talk. I tend to jump in where if I'd be quiet, I would learn a little bit more.
So Steve, thank you so much for joining us here today at PowerPods. It was great to hear how you started your career with Hubble and how you have contributed to this industry.
Thank you.